Ever feel like grief hits everyone so differently?
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because
You see one person going through something, and it's like
right.
completely different from how someone else reacts.
Mhm.
So today we're diving into all that, taking a real close look at chapter 1, and it's called Understanding Grief
Mhm.
for a Reason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's a pretty complex topic. Hopefully this deep dive will help make sense of things for the listeners.
Totally. So right off the bat, this chapter jumps into those 5 stages of grief.
Mm.
Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance.
Mhm.
And maybe it's just me, but those always feel kind of like a checklist.
Right.
And I'm not sure that's how it really works.
And you'd be right to think that. The chapter actually mentions this study, right? Almost half of the people they looked at, they actually experienced anger first, even before denial.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so much for that ordered list, huh? And it makes sense when you think about it. Grief isn't a straight line. It's more fluid, less predictable. You can cycle back to stages you thought were done.
So it's not even like a wave washing ashore then. It's more like
Yeah.
the whole ocean sometimes.
Exactly. Exactly. You get pulled under by a current you didn't even see coming.
No wonder it feels so overwhelming, right?
Absolutely.
One thing this chapter really emphasized was allowing ourselves to feel everything, all those emotions, not just the acceptable ones.
Yeah. Yeah, and I bet a lot of listeners are nodding their heads right now because that's way easier said than done.
Totally. So how do we actually do that? Because it's one thing to say, just feel it. But what does that even look like?
Well, so many of us have been almost trained to just push down any feelings that are unpleasant, uncomfortable. But with grief, the chapter says that can backfire big time.
I could see that. Makes sense.
Imagine trying to hold a beach ball underwater.
Oh, yeah.
You can fight it for a bit, but it's going to pop up eventually.
And probably hit you in the face or something.
Right, and often harder than before. So the chapter suggests finding healthy outlets like journaling. That's a classic.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Or talking to someone you trust, someone who gets it.
Or even just letting yourself cry, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes that release is all it takes.
Absolutely.
Now, there was this other part that really got me thinking. The chapter straight up says, your grief is your own. Which is true, but it's tough, right?
Mhm.
Because we're constantly comparing ourselves to how other people are dealing with
That's
things.
natural to compare,
It is, but it's like,
especially during such an emotional time.
yes. And you
Yeah.
start feeling like you're doing it wrong.
Right, and the chapter really emphasizes this. Like, there's no right way to grieve. It's like a fingerprint. Yours is unique to you.
Like someone might be more outwardly emotional while someone else is quieter about it, but that doesn't mean
Yeah.
one's right and one's wrong.
And so many things play into this, right? Like your personality, your culture, the type of loss itself, that all shapes your experience.
Yeah, that's so important to remember. I guess if we had to sum it all up, the big takeaway is that grief is personal.
Absolutely.
There's no one size fits all.
Definitely.
And beating yourself up for not grieving correctly just adds another layer to everything.
Exactly. And on that note, for anyone listening who's going through it, ask yourself this. What does self-care look like for me right now? Because it's going to be different for everyone.
That's such a good point.
And don't forget, there are resources out there. You're not alone in this.
Powerful stuff. Thanks for diving into this with me.
Of course. Thanks for having me.